Have you ever wondered how a really complex and maybe even startling theological argument gets built? Well, today we're going to do just that. We're going to take a look inside one of these arguments, piece by piece. We're not here to debate it, but to see how it's constructed, almost like taking apart an engine to see how it works. So let's dive in.
When you hear the word Antichrist, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of people, it's this single sinister figure from the future, right? But what if it's something else entirely? The source material we're looking at today asks that very question, and it offers a pretty surprising answer. Maybe the Antichrist isn't a person at all, but a system of belief that's already here.
Okay, so every solid argument needs a strong foundation. You can't just make claims without defining your terms first. And that's exactly where our source material begins. It builds a very specific, very careful definition of what Antichrist means. And it does this by going straight to the New Testament. Everything that follows rests on this biblical definition. Now, here's the first major piece of the puzzle. The source makes a really key distinction. It's not just talking about the Antichrist, singular, but something it calls the spirit of Antichrist. And what is that? Well, it's presented as a broader concept. Any person or any system of thought that stands in opposition to the fundamental Christian beliefs about who Jesus is and what he came to do. So, what kind of denials are we talking about here? The source pinpoints three absolutely crucial ones. The first is denying that Jesus is the Christ, which in this context means denying he is God in human form. The second is denying the relationship between the Father and the Son, a core part of the Christian Trinity. And finally, the third is a flat-out rejection of the incarnation, the whole idea that God actually became a man. And look, they're not just pulling this definition out of thin air. The argument is grounded in Scripture. A verse like this one from 1 John is used as a foundational piece of evidence. You can see right there how it directly connects the term Antichrist with the act of denying Jesus as the Christ, and by extension, denying the Father and the Son. The argument keeps building. So it's not just about who Jesus is, but also about what he did. According to the source, another defining feature of this Antichrist spirit is the rejection of core Christian doctrine. This means distorting the original teachings, denying the gospel message, and, this is a big one, rejecting the atoning death and resurrection of Jesus. To back that point up, the source highlights this pretty stark warning from the book of Galatians. The interpretation here is that a key sign of the Antichrist spirit is when someone or some system presents a different gospel, an alternative path to salvation that contradicts the original one. Now this is where the argument really pivots. By pointing to the specific phrase, many antichrists found in the Bible, the source completely reframes the conversation. Suddenly, it's not about waiting for one bad guy to show up at the end of time. Instead, it's presented as an ongoing issue, a spirit that can pop up in lots of different people and systems throughout history, and even right now. All right, so we've laid the groundwork, we have the source's definition, built step by step from specific Bible verses. Now for the application. This is where we see how this definition is used as a kind of analytical tool to look at one of the world's major religions. This is the moment the whole argument has been building towards. And here you have it, the core thesis. Based on that biblical checklist we just went through, the source we're examining makes its most direct claim. It identifies Islam as what it calls the Antichrist system. The argument is that the central theological beliefs of Islam line up perfectly with the biblical characteristics of the Antichrist spirit it just defined. So how does it make that connection? Well, the source draws several direct parallels. Let's start with the crucifixion. It takes that biblical feature, rejecting the atoning death of Jesus, and connects it directly to the mainstream Islamic belief that Jesus, in fact, did not die on the cross. The second parallel is all about the nature of God. The source connects the biblical point about denying the Father and the Son to the foundational Islamic concept of Tawheed. Tawheed is the absolute, indivisible oneness of God, a principle that, by its very nature, rejects the possibility of God having a son. And the third major parallel gets to the heart of who Jesus is. The source links the biblical characteristic of denying Jesus is God come in the flesh to the Islamic understanding of Jesus, or Isa. In Islam, Jesus is held in incredibly high regard as one of the greatest prophets, but he is seen as a human messenger, not as God incarnate. Okay, so let's just zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. Remember, our goal here wasn't to agree or disagree with this conclusion, but to simply understand the architecture of the argument. How is it built from the ground up? When you break it down, it's a pretty clear three-step blueprint.
Step 1, you define your key term using your own sacred texts. Step 2, you pull out a list of specific theological litmus tests from that definition. And step 3, you use that list as a lens to analyze the beliefs of another faith. That's the anatomy of the argument we just explored.
And all of this leaves us with one final, much bigger question to think about. This specific argument is just one example, right? It makes you wonder, how do the definitions and categories created inside any one faith's sacred texts end up shaping how it sees everyone else on the outside? That's a fascinating question and one worth pondering.